Okay, maybe I sum up just a bit. So I propose to discuss this different perspective concerned international project, and I think it can be on most theoretical level about the idea of international project. Is it the reinforcement of national science or in different countries, or it's the creation of some global science? And this one point, and another point is the challenges and problems of the organization process of international research, and or we can discuss the possibility to combine methods and to bring local context in the research and research methodology. So, and I think we can start, and we can, like, who wants to say something about international?
Of course there is global science, and I don't believe there exists any national science, because in Mexico or in China 2 plus 2 makes 4, right? And of course we had a long period in the Soviet Union when we were supposed to have a special knowledge and on society, and it led to the abysmal failure of the Soviet social science, and explains in part why we still need to learn from other countries. Even though before that period the Russian social scientists were quite on par with the emerging social scholars in the West.
Can I just add something to that? My understanding of Jana's point actually was more that international projects are quite useful for challenging methodological nationalism. So this idea that the societies are discrete in and of themselves, and that they are best understood in this holistic way in and of themselves, because once we see things, even if they're not exactly the same kind of patterns or trends or phenomena even, or we call them in different ways. Nevertheless, once we start looking across borders, then we begin to challenge the very principles upon which we sociological, especially, but wider social sciences were founded. That's what I understood. But I think it's quite, I don't know whether I call it a global science, but I think in terms of challenging methodological nationalism, it's certainly very useful too.
But how much methodological nationalism do we have, in fact, you know? Not much. So do you expect that, you know, we'll shift our interest from societies to the local contexts? I mean, because, I mean, indeed, we cannot expect, I mean, because, you know, doing comparative work does not make it sort of global in the sense that we just lose, you know, the localities we work in, right? You know, because, you know, we do research in India, or we do research in France, or we do research in Russia. I mean, we go to some places, right? So what we do expect, you know, to have it more sort of local in terms of making localities context of our research? Because social research is very much about context.
Absolutely. No, I mean, I think that's very interesting. I mean, I'm sure you can add something very much more useful on the question of methodological nationalism from your experience. But I would say one of the things, for example, that we might be moving away from is perhaps when we do research, especially survey research, that we always insist on it being, for example, nationally representative, and move perhaps more to kind of case study approaches where we have representativeness for particular case studies, and in a way that can work in perhaps better with an integrated research design, rather than, I think if you start out with the principle of methodological nationalism, it doesn't make sense to do a survey unless it is nationally representative. So I think there's some challenges around those kinds of issues, because so you're looking at different phenomena which may appear at the local level or at the case level or at the regional level in many, many different countries, rather than comparing countries. That's simply what I'm looking at.
I would say one of the questions, does research always have to be comparative? No, of course not.
No.
I can think of marvelous studies. The American Voter is a classic study. Nothing but American data, and it analyzes what causes people to vote the way they do and develops all kinds of interesting concepts. without, as far as I can remember, mentioning any other country. And even more refined, there are studies of one small town, Muncie, Indiana, or some little town, that are digging into the context of what goes on in one town and how it works. And they're fascinating, useful studies. So I would never claim that all research has to be cross-national. That would be ridiculous. But I'd say there are certain huge advantages to cross-national research. You get a dimension that you don't get with one country. I would say there are advantages to two things. Longitudinal studies over time enable you to study change and get a sense of what causes what. So this is a hugely important dimension which is worth doing. The other, more or less equally important dimension is cross-national studies enable you to get variation you just don't capture in single country studies. So if you're interested in economic development, for example, if you have thousands of years to spend, you could trace the evolution of one country economically. It would take a very long time and get a very interesting case study, but one quick way of getting a lot of data is cross-national comparisons of rich and poor countries. Or, I've mentioned, if you want to study what makes a country democratic, doing the study only in the United States, or only in France, or only in Russia, is not going to tell you nearly as much as doing a study across countries with varying levels of democracy. This gives you a sense of what is correlated with being democratic, and if you do it over time and cross-nationally, you get a really powerful analytic leverage. It's simply cross-national studies give you variation on culture, history, level of development, political institutions. It gives you variation in something which otherwise it tends to be constant, so that if you only study one country at one point in time, you simply can't analyze these things.